He would take a flight lasting an entire day and night, traveling all the way back from abroad, just to say one sentence. I wanted to see you. Almost everyone thought we were destined to be together, including myself. Until Linda, the female lead, appeared. Only then did I truly understand what it meant that years of companionship could not compete with a sudden spark of attraction. On my 20th birthday party, I confessed to him. As expected, he rejected me. He summed up our relationship of over a decade with one sentence. Agnes, I only see you as a sister. From that day forward, my evil supporting female persona awakened, and I started clinging to him obsessively. Meanwhile, I witnessed, as a bystander, his tumultuous 5-year relationship with Linda, full of breakups and reconciliations. Now, they've finally achieved their happy ending. But I'm trapped in a system where failing to win Kenneth's affection means death. And truthfully, I do love him. At the time, I didn't believe it. I couldn't believe that 18 years of feelings could be overshadowed by a fleeting moment of infatuation. Reality proved me wrong, disastrously so. Kenneth, it hurts so much. When the overwhelming pain finally dissipated, I felt my body becoming weightless, no longer bound to my mortal shell. Strangely, I didn't vanish immediately. Instead, an unseen force guided me to Kenneth's company. He was dressed in a black suit, exuding a refined and professional aura. Funny enough, that suit was one I had tailored for him myself. I had studied fashion design in college, and back then, Kenneth was the center of my world. I naively said, "Every year on your birthday, I'll make you a custom suit. You'll be the face of my brand." He had even promised to invest in me and help my brand go global. I kept my promise, he didn't keep his. "Sir, Miss Linda called to arrange a time for the wedding photo shoot," Kenneth's assistant, Matt, informed him. "I see," Kenneth replied, flipping a photo face down on his desk before silently standing up. As he left, I was compelled to follow. I watched as he and Linda laughed and posed for a full wedding photo shoot. On the way back, for once, Kenneth didn't drop Linda off at her home. The atmosphere in the car was heavy, so suffocating it felt hard to breathe. Kenneth frowned deeply, seemingly lost in thought, as if some unresolved issue weighed on him. After a long silence, he abruptly asked, "Where's Agnes? What's she doing today?" In the past, I was like a clingy little shadow. I would call him countless times a day, send him endless messages. Even if he ignored me, I'd find ways to get updates about him from Matt. But this time, even Matt calmly replied, "Miss Agnes hasn't contacted me at all today." Kenneth's brows furrowed tightly. He pulled out his phone. Our chat history still lingered on yesterday's conversation. "Me, do you really have to marry Linda? Kenneth, if you keep throwing tantrums, we can't even be siblings anymore." His expression hardened as he reluctantly typed a message. "Where are you?" Under normal circumstances, I would have responded in seconds, eagerly chatting away, unwilling to make him wait. But this time, even after 10 minutes, there was no reply. Kenneth finally sensed something was off and instructed Matt to the villa. This villa had been a gift from Kenneth for my coming-of-age ceremony. I stubbornly stayed there and refused to move out, even keeping the butler he'd arranged for me. When Kenneth arrived, the villa was eerily quiet. The only one bustling about in the living room was the butler. Kenneth adjusted his cufflinks nonchalantly and ordered, "Tell her to come down and see me." At the mention of my name, the butler's vacant expression cracked into one of sorrow. He glanced at Kenneth with a mix of grievance and sadness, before slowly uttering, "Miss Agnes has passed away." Kenneth froze for a moment, then let out a scornful laugh. "What new trick is she playing now?" I might have been willful, but I would never joke about life and death. Yet his trust in me was so fragile that he didn't even bother verifying. Certain I was just throwing another tantrum, he left with a parting message for the butler to relay. "Tell her not to come to my wedding. Linda doesn't like it, and neither do I." The butler's gaze flickered, holding a faint trace of pity and restrained resentment as he looked at Kenneth. Kenneth spent less than 10 minutes in the villa before leaving in a hurry. As he got into the car, Matt hesitated, noticing the absence of anyone following him. "Sir, Miss Agnes didn't come down to see you?" After all, in the past, I wouldn't let him wait even a second longer than necessary. Looking back now, apart from being a pawn in the system, I was nothing more than a shameless, unrelenting admirer. "Agnes, you truly deserved this end. Kenneth's brows tightened as his mood grew increasingly agitated. He snapped, "Don't mention that name to me again." Matt opened his mouth as if to speak but ultimately swallowed his words, silently watching Kenneth's worsening frustration. I sat silently in the back seat, right next to Kenneth. He seemed restless, aimlessly driving around the city for hours. His thin lips were pressed into a straight line. He clutched his phone tightly, glancing at it repeatedly, though the screen remained dark. I didn't know what he was waiting for. Was he hoping I'd call him? Send him a message? Oh, I suddenly remembered. Kenneth once told me I was his anchor, the one constant that brought him peace. One time, after Linda had hurt his pride, he came to me drunk in the middle of the night, a mess of emotions. Wrapping me in a tight embrace, his warm breath fanned against my neck, and he murmured softly, "What would I do without you?" That was the closest I'd ever come to winning Kenneth over. If I had stayed the night with him, given his rigid sense of responsibility, he wouldn't have ignored me. But I didn't want to use such cheap tricks to keep him by my side. I wanted to stand before him with dignity. So, I always appeared during his lowest moments. I'd seen him at his most vulnerable countless times, but was never by his side to share his triumphs. During his chaotic 5-year relationship with Linda, they loved and fought relentlessly. Every time he achieved something, he'd childishly run to her, raising his chin in pride and taunting her. "Linda, you're no match for me." Linda, infuriated, would tear up. Kenneth would then panic, fumbling to console her. And I would stand at a distance, staring blankly at the scene that burned my eyes. For 5 long years, I lost count of how many times I'd witnessed moments like these. I wanted to give up. But every time the thought crossed my mind, the system's piercing warning of annihilation echoed in my head. As dawn broke, the sky shifted from misty blue to a faint white as the sun struggled to rise. Kenneth had waited for me all night, only to find no reconciliation. He closed his eyes briefly, then said coldly, "To the office." "Yes, sir." After arriving at the office, Kenneth paced back and forth, visibly agitated. His gaze shifted and landed on the overturned photograph on his desk. In the rush yesterday, I didn't get a clear look at who was in the photo. Was it Linda? These past few days, they've been inseparable. Has he missed her so much that he needs a picture to console himself? For the past 5 years, he and Linda have had their ups and downs, yet the person who's been by his side through it all is still me. Before my 20th birthday, Linda came to me with a confident tone and declared, "Agnes, in the end, I'll be the one who gets Kenneth." I was stunned, but I didn't take her words, which sounded like a declaration of war, to heart. How could that be? Kenneth and I share a deep bond. My birthday party was entirely organized by him, grand and elaborate. So, we made a bet. At the party, I confessed to Kenneth, "I like you." The crowd erupted, clapping and cheering, "Be together. Be together." I waited anxiously for his reply, torn between anticipation and unease. But Kenneth hesitated. His gaze wandered through the crowd before he gave me an answer, almost reluctantly. "Agnes, I only see you as a sister. If I've done anything to make you misunderstand, I apologize." In that moment, the mocking and shocked gazes of the crowd felt like countless sharp blades piercing my heart. A silent execution. I forced a smile, unsure of how to salvage the absurd situation. What I thought would be a natural, mutual affection turned out to be a self-inflicted humiliation. And yet, Linda stepped onto the stage, walking to Kenneth's side and standing shoulder to shoulder with him. With her arms crossed, she shot me a condescending look and said, "Agnes, I told you, didn't I? Kenneth doesn't like you. You brought this upon yourself." Kenneth turned to argue with her, scolding her for being reckless, completely forgetting that I was still caught in an awkward situation. "Sir, Miss Linda is here." Matt's calm voice broke the silence in the otherwise quiet office, pulling both of us from our respective thoughts. "Have her wait outside," Kenneth instructed emotionlessly, nodding before turning to enter the lounge. Inside, the lounge featured a massive walk-in closet filled with clothes of various styles, all carefully curated by me. I prepared them for him for any occasion. But now, as he meticulously picked an outfit from the dazzling array of choices, it was to dress up for a date with another woman. How ironic. All my efforts to unlock the door to his heart ended up tailoring a wardrobe for someone else. Linda, who was supposed to wait outside, barged into the office uninvited and picked up the photograph on the desk. When Kenneth emerged and saw her, his fury was palpable. He lashed out, "Who gave you permission to touch my things?" His sudden anger left everyone stunned. Linda froze for a second before snapping back and accusing him. "We're about to get married, yet you're keeping another woman's photo? What's the meaning of this?" "Another woman's photo?" So it wasn't Linda in the picture. Hearing this, I couldn't help but laugh inwardly. So Kenneth was playing games after all. Well, at least Linda could get a taste of the pain I once endured. The two of them broke into a heated argument that eventually ended with both storming off, leaving behind a mess in the office, and Kenneth's solitary figure. He bent down to pick up the photograph from the floor. Curious, I leaned closer to see who this woman was that Kenneth had hidden in his heart. Even Linda lost to her. But he deliberately shielded the photo with his hand, guarding it as though it were a treasure. I couldn't see a thing. Disappointed, I sighed but quickly let it go. What does it matter to the dead who the living cherish? Besides, I'm about to disappear anyway. Ring, ring. The desk phone's shrill ring pierced the silence of the office. Kenneth glanced at it, his gaze settling on the old-fashioned phone on the desk. A faint smirk tugged at his lips. He deliberately let it ring for a while, before lazily picking it up just as the call was about to end. "Hello," he said casually. The butler's calm, detached voice came from the other end. "Sir, how should we arrange Miss Agnes's funeral?" Kenneth's expression darkened. His brows furrowed, and he snapped impatiently. "Is Agnes still faking her death? Tell her this pathetic trick won't fool me. I'm not canceling the wedding because of it." There was a long silence on the other end. Long enough for Kenneth to think the call had been disconnected. Then, the butler's voice returned, this time tinged with sorrow. "Sir, Miss Agnes has been dead for a day now." "Then just have her cremated." Kenneth barked. The butler asked, "Do you want to see her one last time?" "No need," Kenneth replied coldly. "In the future, don't bother me with such trivial matters." With that, he hung up. I heard everything, clear as day. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Trivial matters? So, my life and death were that insignificant to him. I never expected my own funeral arrangements to be so perfunctory, just drag me out and burn me? It was both infuriating and absurd. But of course, this was the man I once loved, decisive to the end. Evening. Linda, who had been gone all day, finally returned. Her hair was freshly styled, her makeup flawless, and she wore a stunning dress as she invited Kenneth to a candlelit dinner at the upscale restaurant downstairs. Under the sparkling chandelier, the diamond earrings dangling from Linda's earlobes gleamed brightly. She tilted her head slightly, brushing her hair aside to reveal her slender neck, and smiled with an air of arrogance. "Kenneth, I've decided to forgive you for what happened today. But before we get married, you need to get rid of everything related to that woman." Her voice carried a tone of confidence, almost flamboyant. There was no room for negotiation in her words, only a command. As she finished speaking, she gracefully cut into her steak, no longer sparing Kenneth a glance. This was Linda, always so certain and nonchalant, just as she had been throughout their 5 tumultuous years of on-again, off-again interactions. The two had never established a formal relationship, yet she carried herself as though everything was under her control. Watching her composed yet haughty demeanor brought my mind back to Kenneth's birthday, 3 months ago. Evening. Linda, who had been missing for a whole day, finally returned. She had styled her hair, done her makeup meticulously, and was wearing a beautiful dress. She invited Kenneth to a candlelight dinner at an upscale restaurant downstairs. Under the bright crystal chandelier, the diamond earrings dangling from Linda's ears sparkled brilliantly. She tilted her head, smoothing a lock of hair, revealing her long, graceful swan-like neck, and smiled arrogantly. "Kenneth, I forgive you for today, but before we get married, you need to get rid of everything related to that woman." Her tone was confident and bold. There was no room for negotiation in her voice, more of an announcement, even a command. With that, she elegantly cut into her steak, no longer looking at Kenneth. She had always been so certain, so casual. Just like her 5 years with Kenneth, during which they never solidified their relationship. As I watched her proud expression, my mind was suddenly swept back to 3 months ago, on Kenneth's birthday. I had given Kenneth a suit I had sewn by hand. After he put it on, he proudly showed it off to all his friends. "My girl is amazing." Our mutual friends teased him, saying, "You're so lucky, Kenneth. Only you could wear something she made with her own hands." Everyone praised me. But Linda, sitting in the shadows, gave me a cold look. She downed her glass of red wine, then spoke. "Kenneth, let's get married." The lively atmosphere instantly froze, and everyone's gaze flickered between the three of us. Linda glanced at me dismissively before continuing with the air of a victor. "I'm tired, and I want a home. Will you give me one?" In that moment, my blood seemed to freeze. I stiffly turned to look at Kenneth. I could see the joy in his dark eyes, barely concealed. Maybe I had already guessed his answer, but I still clung to a sliver of hope, wishing he would refuse. But fate, alas, had never been on my side. They were getting married. Now, witnessing a similar scene, my heart was calm and untroubled. I no longer cared about the other woman Linda spoke of. Kenneth had agreed. They were back together. They finished their dinner happily, then left together for their marital home. As soon as the door opened, Linda immediately climbed onto Kenneth, showering his neck with messy kisses. Biting gently on his Adam's apple, she murmured, "Kenneth, who do you think is better in bed, me or Agnes?" Kenneth, already lost in desire, reached to pull at Linda's skirt. But upon hearing my name, his interest immediately waned. He pushed Linda away with a blank expression, then walked to the balcony to light a cigarette. The cigarette glowed red in his fingers, flickering in the cold wind. Kenneth leaned against the railing, gazing at the distant skyline, the neon lights twinkling. I couldn't tell what he was thinking. Linda had always been proud. With a flick of her finger, a whole group of men would gladly jump into fire for her. But now, as she lowered her guard and tried to please Kenneth, she was met with cold indifference. Her mood soured. After showering, she came out wearing Kenneth's white shirt, her long, fair legs exposed. With an annoyed tone, she asked, "You seem pretty shaken when you hear Agnes's name. You're still thinking about her, aren't you?" Kenneth stubbed out his cigarette, tossing it into the trash. Irritated, he explained, "I've told you 100 times, she's my sister." "Sister?" Linda scoffed. "If she's just your sister, why does she follow you around all the time? What can I do? Agnes lost both her parents. I'm the only one she can rely on in this world." Linda's anger didn't lessen. "I hate you people who hide behind the excuse of sister and still do things that aren't clear at all. She knows I'm about to marry you, yet she still clings to you like this. She might as well be dead. It's better than embarrassing herself." Listening to their argument, I couldn't help but laugh. Linda truly was a fortune teller. I really was dead. I wouldn't be in anyone's way anymore. On the contrary, it was Kenneth who seemed unable to tolerate such words, snapping, "Shut up." Linda became even more aggrieved, roaring, "You're still protecting her. Kenneth, you don't love me." With that, she slammed the door and stormed off. The room fell into silence. Kenneth sat alone in the living room, smoking for hours. There were countless cigarette butts on the floor. Seeing him like this, I feared he might smoke himself to death. When his pack of cigarettes ran out, Kenneth shuffled in his slippers to find more. He didn't find any cigarettes, but he did find his phone on the coffee table. The screen lit up, and the notification bar was full of missed calls and unread messages. Scrolling all the way down, there wasn't a single message from me. Kenneth frowned as he opened my chat. "If you keep acting up, I'm marrying Linda the day after tomorrow." Seeing the message he sent me, I felt a wave of absurdity. What did this mean? Was he implying that if I showed up, he would call off the wedding? But before I died, I had asked him, "Are you really going to marry Linda?" Kenneth, my life or death is in your hands. But you wouldn't even give me a chance to live. Even if you spent your whole life as a widower, even if I never got to win you over, I could survive. But once you marry her, the system will declare my mission a failure. Failure means I no longer have the right to exist in this world." And as expected, my message still went unanswered. Bang! Kenneth suddenly threw his phone against the wall, and it shattered into pieces. That phone was a gift from me. I had secretly hoped we could use matching couple phones. Well, it's broken now. Broken is better. Now that I'm dead, all ties with Kenneth are severed. The next day, Kenneth didn't go to work as usual. Matt came looking for him. "Sir, the tulips you ordered for Miss Agnes have arrived. Should we send them over?" "Send them." Kenneth spoke in a few words. "If she wants to play dead, I'll send her the tulips. I don't believe she'll still hide away." Kenneth's tone was certain. Listening to this, I found it quite amusing. How much did I used to fawn over him for Kenneth to think that sending me a truckload of flowers would make me rush out to see him? And furthermore, he forgot, I'm allergic to tulips. "Kenneth, you really don't care about me at all if you've forgotten this." Confident, he personally drove the truckload of tulips to Villa, where he had them planted in the backyard. The housekeeper heard the noise outside and came out. Kenneth waved at her, smiling brightly. "Where is she?" "Tell her to come out." The housekeeper's eyelids flickered, and she numbly repeated, "Sir, Miss has passed away." Kenneth's face instantly darkened, his lips curling with distaste. He muttered, "I can tolerate the joke once or twice, but the third time, it's just not funny anymore." When Kenneth decided to marry Linda, I had fought with him for a long time. In the final days of my life, our relationship was almost completely shattered. Every day, I lived in intense fear and panic, waking up and asking Kenneth over and over, "Are you really going to marry Linda?" He replied, "Yes." In the beginning, he treated me like a child throwing a tantrum. But after a while, he became impatient and warned me, "Agnes, if you keep this up, just leave." I shivered, my body soaked in cold sweat. The system kept sending me death warnings in my mind. 20 days remain before the mission expires. If you fail, the host will be eliminated. Please complete the mission as soon as possible. The vast world, and yet, I haven't seen enough of it. I humbly begged him, "If you get married, will I die? Kenneth, even if we can never be together, could you please not get married?" To me, this request felt absurd. How could Kenneth possibly agree? He simply blocked me. It wasn't until Linda specifically asked me to be her bridesmaid that he finally removed me from his blacklist. The butler still wore his usual wooden expression, sarcastically tugged at his lip, and finally told a lie. "Yes, Miss didn't die. She went on a long trip." Kenneth, satisfied with the answer, finally smiled and nodded. "Get her back as soon as possible. I'll allow her to attend my wedding." Ha ha ha. I almost burst out laughing when I heard this. Kenneth treated his wedding like what? Should I be so grateful that he allowed me to attend? Should I be bowing down to him? Don't be ridiculous. The butler, oblivious, nodded and agreed. I will make sure to bring her to the wedding." With the promise made, Kenneth left in high spirits. Yesterday, Kenneth had ordered the butler to burn my body. So I wanted to see if the butler actually did it. But before I could drift into the villa, some mysterious force forcibly dragged me away with Kenneth. Why? Why, after I had already died, was I still bound to him? Was I born just for him? I felt a deep sadness for myself. In this life, I've never had a life of my own. I took the boy to be my everything, but we got lost in the passage of time. The third day after my death was Kenneth's wedding. He didn't visit the villa to see me. He wore a white suit, standing with Linda, who wore a luxurious wedding dress, truly a perfect match. But at his wedding, he kept zoning out, his eyes constantly wandering toward the door. When he and Linda exchanged rings, they missed, and the ring fell to the floor. Linda, clearly annoyed, growled, "Kenneth." To everyone's surprise, Kenneth actually announced a pause in the wedding. The whole room went silent. The tensions that had been building up exploded. Linda ripped off her veil and angrily asked, "What exactly do you mean?" Kenneth whispered, "She hasn't arrived yet." Who? Who hasn't arrived? I couldn't react, but Linda immediately guessed, "Agnes? You're waiting for her?" Kenneth stared at her, his gaze intense, and gently tried to calm her down. "Linda, wait a little longer. Our wedding will be incomplete without Agnes." There was an obsessive, stubborn look on his face. To anyone looking, Kenneth seemed like a madman. Linda finally broke down, crying and shouting, "The one who is supposed to marry you is me, not Agnes. Kenneth, do you even love me?" Kenneth ignored her tantrum, continuing to wait for me. Just then, Matt walked in confidently and said, "Sir, Miss Agnes has arrived." At the sound of those words, Kenneth finally smiled in relief, but then his face darkened with anger. She's been hiding all this time and now she finally decides to show up. Matt, however, had a strange expression, but Kenneth didn't notice. He left the frantic bride behind and stormed toward the exit. "Agnes, you." Kenneth's face turned cold, ready to confront me, but as soon as he saw the scene in front of him, his voice froze. I, too, was stunned. The butler spoke coldly, "Sir, I brought Miss Agnes to your wedding. After the ceremony, we need to take her to the crematorium. My body was in a cold coffin, being driven here. The butler, he actually brought my corpse to Kenneth's wedding. What a move, this one is unforgettable." I looked up and laughed wildly. If I were alive, I'd definitely give the butler a thumbs up. Kenneth's anger froze on his face, his expression twisted and ferocious. He stood still for a while, trying to process the butler's words. He glanced at the hearse parked by the side of the road and sneered. "You're really going all out with this performance, huh?" The butler replied coldly, "Miss is right here, sir. Are you not going to come over and see for yourself?" His tone was full of mockery. Kenneth paused for a few seconds, then slowly walked toward the hearse. But his steps were heavy, as though each one drained all his strength. He moved slowly, almost dragging himself to the hearse. Inside the coffin, my face wasn't peaceful. I'd been violently torn from my body before I died, and I had endured quite a bit of suffering. Kenneth only glanced at me, and it was as if he'd been struck by a blow. His knees buckled, and he fell to the ground. "Sir." Matt rushed over to help him. Kenneth pulled away from his hand, pointing at the coffin, his voice trembling. Matt, look again. Is it really her?" "It's Miss Agnes." Matt answered firmly. The butler added, "Sir, she has been dead for 3 days." Kenneth suddenly lifted his face, and then, as though realizing something, he wiped his face and found tears. He questioned, "Then why didn't you tell me sooner?" The butler remained expressionless. "I've been telling you, but you insisted it was a joke, and you wouldn't even go upstairs to confirm." Kenneth finally understood. He had always thought this was just my way of forcing him to cancel the wedding, never imagining it was real. Because in the past, I had used tricks like running away or going out of contact. Linda had said, "Agnes is sick, you always said you only saw her as a sister, yet she kept clinging to you. She loves to use these childish tactics to threaten you, Kenneth. Don't let her deceive you." And so, he believed Linda's words. He refused to trust me any longer. "Sir, I must take Miss to the crematorium now." The butler said this, then got into the driver's seat, and the hearse drove off. Kenneth stood frozen for a moment, then grabbed Matt's arm and ordered, "Drive, chase after them." They immediately got into a $1 million luxury car and started chasing the hearse down the road. I watched the scene, stunned, and thought, "Kenneth, this is utterly absurd. At least I'm dead now. If I were still alive, as the chased protagonist, I would surely have died of embarrassment." I floated to the crematorium. I watched as my body, once a person, was burned by the flames, turning into a pile of grotesque, ugly ashes, packed into a small black box. At that moment, the mysterious force binding me disappeared, and my soul felt light. It seemed that I was about to leave. When the staff brought out my urn, Kenneth instinctively reached out his hand, but the butler beat him to it. He said, "Sir, Miss wouldn't want to go with you." Kenneth coldly stared at the butler, his fingers curling and uncurling in frustration, unable to suppress the overwhelming despair crashing through him. "Agnes is the only one in this world for me. She can only come with me." He frantically went to grab the urn, but in the scuffle, it flew out of his hands. Matt's eyelids twitched, and he jumped to catch it, rolling with it on the ground. Both Matt and I sighed in relief when it finally landed safely. My ashes hadn't scattered. I didn't want to be scattered to the wind after death. Seeing that I was intact, Kenneth ordered Matt, "Give her to me. I'll take her home. To the home that truly belongs to us." These words sounded incredibly sarcastic to me. "Kenneth, that's your home, not mine." Matt hesitated, looking at me, then at the butler, unable to make a decision. Finally, the butler spoke. "Miss once said if she died, her ashes should be scattered into the sea. She didn't want to stay in this painful world. Luckily, there's still one person in this world who remembers my words. For the past 3 months, Kenneth has been busy preparing for his wedding to Linda, and he hasn't cared about me at all. The daily countdown for the system's tasks has nearly driven me insane. In the end, I couldn't tell whether my obsession with pursuing Kenneth was because I wanted to stay alive or because I truly loved him. So many things were beyond my control. The moment Linda appeared, everything spiraled out of control. Many times, I couldn't even control myself. When I was drunk, I confessed to the butler. I'm not from this world. In my past life, I died horribly, captured by traitors, whipped with a salted whip until my skin was torn apart. They tortured me in countless ways. The trauma from death was so deep that when my soul was wandering between heaven and earth, something called a system bound me. It said it could give me a chance to live, and if I completed its tasks, I would be able to live a peaceful life until I grew old. What an enticing offer. So without a second thought, I agreed. Who was I supposed to pursue? It was the person I refused to reveal in my previous life, no matter how much they tortured me. Kenneth. I was just an ordinary fisherwoman, drifting through life and finally marrying you, while you were plotting for your imperial ambitions. I was pregnant and captured by your enemies, tortured to death without revealing your whereabouts, but you betrayed me in both this life and the last. How can I not resent this? When did she say that? Kenneth's face turned pale as he hurriedly asked. The butler met his gaze and said every word like a dagger to the heart. It was the night you spent with Miss Linda. She told me herself that your wedding day would be her death day. In the next second, the strong butler suddenly turned into a delicate beauty, slender and graceful, holding an oiled paper umbrella. She glanced at the urn that Matt was holding. The beauty pointed to where I stood. Her voice was seductive as she said, Agnes is standing right there. Tell me, in front of her, do you love her or not? Kenneth froze for a moment, then nodded repeatedly, as though he feared I might disappear if he hesitated for even a second. He said, I love her, I love Agnes. I love her. His voice grew weaker, mixed with suffocating despair and pain. This was the confession I had desperately longed for all my life, but when I finally heard it with my own ears, I found I didn't care anymore. I even felt a little disgusted. Really, it was disgusting. The beauty sighed softly, unfortunately, you woke up too late. She walked toward Kenneth, and her hand, glowing with blue light, passed in front of his forehead. Immediately, his mind cleared. The information he received appeared in my mind as well. In his past life, Kenneth had schemed to seize the throne and married the daughter of a powerful minister to secure his empire. As for me, his humble wife, I had long been forgotten, with not even a mention in history books. It was I, my resentment soaring to the heavens, who brought this beauty to me. She had offered me a test and eternal life, allowing me to travel between worlds as a task doer. I didn't want it. I only wanted to reunite with my husband. She sighed, what if your husband is an ungrateful man? I didn't believe it. And then, I traded my soul for this life. Now, what difference was there between me and the mermaid in fairy tales, who traded her tail for legs out of love? Every step I take feels like walking on a razor's edge, a pain too unbearable to describe. Only in the end did I regret it all. At this moment, I only wanted to return to the sea that belonged to me. Memories of 2 lifetimes poured into Kenneth's mind. The information was overwhelming, and he couldn't accept it. He struck his head in pain, calling my name. Agnes, I was wrong. I was wrong. I really didn't know it would turn out like this. In my past life, it was Linda. She told me you had no future, and I ran away with someone else. I thought setting you free was the best thing I could do for you. I never imagined it would turn out like this. It's all your fault. You thought it, but why didn't you ever bother to find out the truth? I shouted in fury. In my rage, my soul solidified, and I appeared before him. Seeing me, Kenneth was overjoyed and rushed forward to hug me. But he passed right through me. Staring at his empty hands, he stood frozen. The beauty glanced at him, her eyes showing no sympathy, and turned to me. Agnes, you failed to win Kenneth's heart. According to our agreement, your soul will be destroyed, and you will have no next life. Do you accept it? I accept. I lowered my eyes. All the consequences were what I should have borne. Kenneth screamed desperately, "Agnes, I love you. I really love you. I. I. I was deceived. I was deceived, that's all. I thought you would never leave me." No matter how loudly he shouted, it was all in vain. My soul gradually turned transparent and finally disappeared. The beauty took my urn and vanished too. Kenneth collapsed, sitting on the ground in a daze, his eyes vacant and lifeless. But his lips still murmured, "Agnes, I really love you. I love you." Matt couldn't watch anymore and tried to pull him away. "Sir, stop shouting, Miss Agnes can't hear you anymore." The scene just now had truly shocked him, far beyond his understanding. He even felt a bit of satisfaction that Kenneth had brought this upon himself. But since Kenneth was his boss, he dared not speak out, only silently seething with anger. The beauty took me to a virtual space. Before me was a huge transparent screen showing the scene at the crematorium. Kenneth had lost his mind. He refused to accept that I was gone. He rushed in and forced the staff to cremate him along with me. "If she's going to the sea, then I'll go with her." The staff stared at him in horror and called the police. Kenneth was diagnosed with a mental disorder and sent to a psychiatric hospital. In the hospital, he behaved erratically, harming himself with a knife every day without hesitation. Yet despite the blood flowing everywhere, he never died. Every time he woke up, the wounds had healed. He laughed foolishly, "How much do you hate me, that you won't even let me die?" Seeing him so crazed, I was stunned. I asked the beauty, "Will he become insane?" "No," the beauty said. "He's the only lucky one in this world. God won't let him die. He will live on, fully aware, enduring the backlash of his actions." Linda heard about him and bailed him out of the psychiatric hospital, bringing him back home. Seeing Kenneth so depressed, she scolded him angrily. "Is it just one woman? She's dead, so what? Kenneth, are you going to give up your company for a dead woman? Do you know how many people will lose their jobs if you don't work?" Her words were full of righteous indignation. It reminded me of when Kenneth, upon hearing of my disappearance, was torn between life and death. She had fabricated a lie, saying I had run off with another man. After 3 days of despair, Kenneth finally pulled himself together, seized control of Central City, and completed his grand plans. And now, the scene was repeating itself. Kenneth's eyes blazed with hatred. He raised a knife and, taking advantage of Linda's unpreparedness, plunged it deep into her. She had tried to educate him, but was caught off guard and lost her life. I doubt she'll ever understand how she died. It was truly absurd. I turned away, not wanting to watch this heart-wrenching scene any longer. The beauty understood what I meant and raised her hand to turn off the screen. She said, "Instead of getting lost in love and hate, it's better to do something meaningful. Agnes, there are many women in this world, just like you, who are stuck in the mud. Go save them." "Save them? I can't even save myself." She smiled gently at the corner of her lips. "How would you know unless you try?" "All right, then I'll try. If I can't escape this trap, then I'll at least try my best to be someone else's redemption." Kenneth killed someone. But due to his mental illness, he couldn't be sentenced and was sent to a psychiatric hospital. He held the only photo he had of me and murmured my name over and over again, "Agnes, Agnes." He said he loved me. He claimed it was just because his heart had been deceived. But unfortunately, it was all just an excuse. If your love for me were truly strong, how could you only come to your senses when it was too late? Kenneth, let's never meet again, in this life or the next. The end.